Halo 4 isn't Halo. It's something new. And as hard as it is to say, it's something better. Okay, let's not get too carried away here, but some people actually really do love Halo 4. And it's really interesting to take a look at the larger scope of the Halo community, because Halo 4 often is looked at one of the more divisive games in the Halo franchise. And while we've voiced our opinions in the past of Halo 4, both good and critical, it's really interesting to take a step back and look at the perspective of the people who really did like Halo 4, and people who look back at Halo 4 with the same level of nostalgia goggles and just pure love for the game as players like Luke and I do for older Halo games like Halo 2 and 3. We could go on for hours about the very specific things that we didn't necessarily like about this entry in the Halo franchise, but there is an interesting perspective you can gain by hearing the things that some fans really did appreciate and things that fans will defend until the bitter end, because Halo 4 is just that important to them. And while sure, we can all agree on some very black and white issues when it comes to Halo as a whole, things that are typically better for Halo and things that are typically worse, it's really interesting to look at how some of the newer things or the special things that released in Halo 4 really hit those gaming beats to the players who ended up really liking Halo 4 down the road. And if we try to break apart Halo, we can kind of subdivide it into a few different categories. I mean, we got campaign, multiplayer. There's some places and things we can talk about here, so let's set aside some of our criticisms for at least like a couple minutes maybe as a contrast to some of the content on this channel. I do think it is important to account for some of the opinions that other fans in the Halo community definitely have when it comes to Halo 4. So to start things off, we look directly at the campaign of Halo 4 itself. After Halo 3 ended, things kind of left off on this cliffhanger, and while Halo 3 had a satisfying ending, they always left the door open for Master Chief to one day come back. Everyone all knew this would one day happen, and when Halo 4 was announced, the hype was real, and a lot of fans were excited to see what happened with Master Chief and Cortana finally years later. But when the game came out, the campaign definitely was a little bit contentious amongst Halo fans. We can all mostly agree that Master Chief and Cortana's personalities are drastically different than their personalities in the first 3 Halo games. And it was obvious that 343 was taking this approach to really explore this theme of the humanity or the lack thereof within the Master Chief, juxtaposed to the humanity or lack thereof within Cortana. And right out of the gate, these characters are explored from the very beginning. And while this is quite different to the way that characters were developed and explored in the games in the original trilogy, some fans of the Halo franchise, the change of pace for these characters was a unique approach. And while in the original trilogy, Master Chief is kind of the stronger, silent type, in the novels, Master Chief for the most part wasn't really this mute character, kind of like what we see in the original Bungie era Halo games. So in a sense, this version of Master Chief that we saw in Halo 4 was a new version, unique to Halo 4, but it also was kind of familiar to the type of character that was seen more in the books. At the end of the day, it came down to a creative approach, and for some fans, it resonated very well with them, and they really enjoyed that aspect of Halo 4's campaign. To tie that all together, a lot of fans really enjoyed the fact that there was a lot of depth to the story, where you really had to dive into the Halo universe to understand everything. The Forerunners were always interesting and kind of this big, ambiguous type of aspect in Halo, and with the books leading up to Halo 4's release and carried on through Halo 4, finally the door was opened on that, and there were some answers for some long-term fans. Also, there was of course some excitement about facing off against a brand new enemy class with the Prometheans, and just to tie it all together, Halo 4 was this new entity in Halo where everything looked completely different or new. There was a brand new aesthetic, and there was different music and different composers working on the soundtrack that sounded different. It was a complete shift in the approach that Halo had before, and while it was jarring for some, it was banging for others, and there is something to appreciate with at least the idea of trying something different, especially considering that Halo 4 was at the end of the Xbox 360's life, and the graphical limitations were limited, so art style changes to make a game look new and fresh and high-end were kind of something that had to be considered. Honestly, the graphics were pretty good for the Xbox 360 era, and the mix of pre-rendered cutscenes along with in-game rendered cutscenes did make some scenes pop a lot more. Shifting over to multiplayer and Forge, there were a lot of things to like, and I stand in the group that honestly believes that deep down Halo 4 does have a pretty good multiplayer. And while the launch was a bit bumpy, the way the loadouts were integrated and some of those other things were a little bit odd at the beginning, I do feel like they really hit their stride midway through development when they started putting out some title updates. And finally, the real great aspects of Halo 4's multiplayer were brought to the front and became more visible and more accessible to players to appreciate. Not to say Halo 4's launch was all bad either when it came to multiplayer. Things that you could want were there at the start, like Big Team Battle and Forge. They're all there day one. The weapons in the game were satisfying to shoot, and it felt like they had some weight to them. And while it was a departure from Halo 3 or even Halo Reach for that matter, there was this idea of presenting Spartans in a way where they felt like these giant tanky soldiers and not these things that just kind of fly through the air like crazy. Also, it was a really interesting approach, to say the least, that they expanded the story to encapsulate the multiplayer and make multiplayer a part of the canon as well. The whole idea of them being these training exercises that are simulated in battlegrounds was kind of an interesting approach, and to bring a player Spartan into the universe of being a canon Spartan 4 was kind of a really cool approach, building off of the idea of Noble 6 from Halo Reach. When it came to Forge and custom games, there were some really big improvements made along the way. Like for instance, in Forge, now you could duplicate objects and you could lock objects along the way, which were cool. And while I know we're guilty of joking about how shiny everything is in Halo 4 and how it just seems like the light is overbearing at times, it's very obvious with this game being at the end of the life cycle and them having to really focus on different techniques to make the game look good in 2012. There was some really unique things added in real-time lighting. So when you were building maps and forging and stuff, the way that the light and shadows worked were actually a huge step up from Halo Reach. Also with Forge, they decided to make a big jump and introduce different canvases that allowed for players to build in different settings without necessarily having to be restricted to one general Forge world, like in Halo Reach's Forge world. And I really liked that you were able to build on the moon or in a ravine or something like that, rather than being limited to just the same type of environment with every single map that you built. Also, the game type Flood, while limiting the amount of customization you used to be able to do on the Infection game type, was really cool to have enemy players that looked infected with Flood just running around. It was some spooky stuff. Customization on the Spartan front was really cool too. The large amount of new armor that was introduced that actually looked good was really cool, and the visor colors had a huge jump in customization over Halo Reach, which was something fans had wanted for such a long time. And finally, you could get a ton of different colors for your Spartan's visor, something that they're still going back and adding into older Halo games like Halo 3 on the Master Chief Collection. Now, we've done a whole video talking about Spartan Ops already, and if you haven't seen it, make sure you go check that out on our channel, because I do think we gave it a pretty fair analysis. But one thing that is really interesting is just the inclusion of Spartan Ops. The idea of trying to expand the Halo story beyond just what campaign launched with the game day one, and to build off of that, was something we thought was a really awesome idea. And the fact that there was this narrative that had these amazing looking cutscenes with it was really cool. And it makes us optimistic about the future. If Halo Infinite truly is supposed to be this game that lasts 10 years, that when we do see expansions down the road, we might see something that expands the narrative further along and continues the story beyond Halo Infinite in somewhat of a meaningful way. In the campaign of Spartan Ops, while there was a lot of filler stuff, a lot of really big story moments happened. I mean, Halsey lost her arm, Requiem just exploded or something. I'm not too sure how that worked, but still, it was really cool that these big narrative decisions were made and allowed to exist in Spartan Ops and weren't just put aside or saved just because of the fact it wasn't a main campaign. And we could go on forever teasing the little things about Halo 4, but at the end of the day, having the insight of what was really important to some fans who loved Halo 4 and why Halo 4 is, for some, their favorite Halo game is something that we still understand and can appreciate and support, even if we are adamant that Halo 3 is best Halo. Don't come at me. Also, I just gotta say, Skyline was a really cool looking map. I know it's out there, but hey, Skyline was neat. But hey, love it or hate it, what were your thoughts on Halo 4? Do you agree with some of the things that people liked about it, or are you completely against it? And if you are, why are you against it? Let us know in the comments, make your case, because Luke and I really like to take some time to look at some of the more contentious arguments in the Halo community, and this is kind of one of them. But if you want more videos like this, make sure you guys are subscribed with notifications on. Join our Discord, there's a link in the description down below. Alright, we'll see you guys next time with a new video.